Up next, we've got Margaret Thomas, co-host of the Bite Me podcast, the show about edibles. And Margaret is going to be speaking to us today on a topic called kitchen table edibles, accessibility, creativity, and the role of homemade infusions in cannabis culture. All the good stuff. We'll get you presenter here. There you go, Margaret. Uh,
Great, thank you. I'm just going to
hey,
pull up, share my screen here.
cool.
Hopefully everybody can see that. Great. So I just want to start out by saying, Rob, thanks for hosting this event. I think we need more events like this because it really has a grassroots feel, and I know how much work you put into pulling this off. So thanks for the invite, and I'm really excited to be here. So let's get into it. Kitchen table edibles, accessibility, creativity, and the role of homemade edibles in cannabis culture. So just to give you a little guideline of the journey I'm going to take you on today, we're going to start out with a little introduction. That's a little bit about me and who I am and why I'm here. Edibles on a budget, the place of edibles in cannabis culture, community and connection through edibles, what the future holds, and my closing. And of course, if there's time for some questions, I'm happy to answer questions as well. So to start out, I am your host today, Margaret, and I am the host of a podcast called Bite Me, the show about edibles. And I have been hosting that show for over 6 years now. It is a combination of solo episodes where I talk about edibles that I've made in my own home kitchen and science education episodes. And then I've also had the opportunity to interview a lot of amazing people in the cannabis space as well, which has been a real privilege. So I've learned a lot over the last 6 years. But the reason I started to get into edibles is I've been an off again, on again cannabis consumer most of my adult life. But I was finding I got to a certain point as I was getting a little older, and that still actually holds true today, that I'm pretty sensitive to THC when I'm smoking it. And I'm also an ex-cigarette smoker, so smoking joints doesn't really appeal to me that much anymore. And so I had access to some trim or shake or something about 10 years ago. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to try and make some edibles. How I didn't overdose myself to this day, I'm not really sure. But had I messed that up, I probably wouldn't be sitting here today because they turned out so good. And I really liked the effects on me. I didn't get the paranoia that I often experience, the rapid heart rate, the drop in body temperature that came with smoking cannabis. But the edible experience was just so much more suited. It's still my preferred way to consume cannabis. That warm hug, the slow onset, just all of it. And so, yeah, I started experimenting with making edibles 10 years ago. And then, of course, I later started a podcast about it because I also happen to be a big podcast consumer myself. So I married my two favorite things. And then from there, it really started a journey on education around cannabis that continues to this day, because as we know, there's always so much more to learn. I started working for a few years at the first legal dispensary in my town. And I should mention, I do reside in Canada, and we've had the blessing of federal legalization for like 7 years now. So that's been actually really great. I became a cannabis a certified ganjier not long after that. I started my online community, the Bite Me Cannabis Club, and then I also later got my TCI cannabis, a certified cannabis educator. And all of this has just helped my podcast and just sharing the knowledge because I'm learning alongside all of my listeners. So today I'm hoping that we can cover the accessibility, the cultural roots, and community that make edibles so special. So the first myth I want to bust is that edibles have to be done, like you need expensive equipment to make edibles. Sometimes I feel like that myth is out there because we see all these fancy gadgets, a $300 infusion machine that's going to make making edibles so easy. And I have to admit, like full disclosure, I have some of those devices. I definitely got a couple of them before I even started the podcast, but they're a nice to have. They are absolutely not necessary to making great edibles at home. And I feel like the idea that you have to have fancy equipment can really make it even less accessible because people are often already pretty intimidated when it comes to making edibles at home. And because I hear those types of questions pretty often. And people have been making edibles with basic kitchen equipment for decades, tools you already have, like your stove and your oven, your slow cooker, your growing supply of glass jars, if you're anything like me, pots, pans, sieves, all the things you already have to cook. Even if you're not a big cook, you have the stuff you can make great edibles at home. You can also figure out the potency of your edibles with simple math and free online calculators. There's one on my website, but there's all kinds of great calculators out there. It is a good idea to learn the math, and it's actually pretty simple once you kind of know what you're doing. And there is the T-check as well, if it means you're not sending your infusions out to a lab. But again, that's sort of a pricier add-on for people who might be making a lot of edibles at home. And of course, there's the experience-driven dosing by starting low, going slow, that adage we've heard time and time and time again, which I love to remind people all the time because not heeding that advice is, of course, how people get themselves into trouble. And I'm sure anybody who's experienced or experimented with edibles has had that feeling. And so that also goes along with taking detailed notes and logs on your experience. So you can figure out and tailor and zone in on your perfect dose for you because we all vary so much. Through the years of doing my podcast, I used to think very differently about dosing, but now I've learned that so many factors have nothing to do. Like if you are a heavy smoker, that doesn't translate into you being someone who can tolerate high doses of edibles, for one. So I'm going to bust that myth too. But um, th there's also the accessibility piece. So when I'm eating an edible that someone else has made for me, I have no idea if they used a device to make that edible or if they just did it in a pot on the stove. What I actually want to know is have they figured out the potency of that edible? Because I'm done with the days of getting mystery edibles. I have received edibles recently where someone gifted it to me, and I always find that such a kind gesture to gift something that you've made in your own kitchen because that's your time and energy and love into that food. But if they haven't figured out the potency and they don't know, I'm not going to eat it. I've overdosed myself too many times to play that game again. And so knowing these things like how to calculate the potency, even if it's just a range, I can work with that. I can take steps to mitigate any issues, but no more of a mystery edibles. So when people think of cannabis culture, they often think of people smoking joints or hitting bongs, doing dabs. But edibles have been around for literal ages. Think of edibles like majoun, a Moroccan confection that typically includes dried fruit and hash, or bong, which is a cannabis beverage that originated in India. And we all need to eat, so it only kind of makes sense that we'd find ways to incorporate cannabis into the things that we love to eat and drink. Now, before legalization, we had our favorite edibles, we had infused butters, the underground cannabis kitchen. Someone like Brownie Mary comes to mind when I think of the underground cannabis kitchen. And if you're unfamiliar, she's the granny in San Francisco who made brownies for those who were suffering during the HIV/AIDS crisis because the patients were needing relief from their symptoms. And she, through the sharing of her edibles, was a true embodiment of the mutual care that edibles can foster. Now, fast forward to today, there's programs out there like the Cannabis Substitution Project, which is based in Vancouver, and they just distribute high dose edibles to the vulnerable people in Vancouver's downtown east side for medical purposes and for harm reduction. And they kind of operate in a quasi-legal space because a lot of the edibles that they're giving away to these folks are way higher doses than what you can buy on the legal market here in Canada. And for those who are unaware, in Canada, currently, and it's been this way pretty much since they allowed edibles to be sold on the legal market, edibles are capped at 10 milligrams a package. So if you have a package of edibles that has 5 gummies in it, for instance, they're going to be 2 milligrams each. So just for some context there. But the underground sharing economy is built on trust. And even groups like this Cannabis Substitution Project, they are finding ways to use edibles in a really positive way. So making your own edibles allows you to take control of your high life because you have control over the input material. You can decide, hey, do I want to use bud? Do I want to use shake or trim from something I grew or maybe a friend grew? Do I want to use concentrates? You can tailor the potency to your preferences. You can also change up the cannabinoid blends as well. And then there's the ingredients. You can take into account your own dietary preferences, and you can turn almost any recipe into an edible or a culinary cannabis dish with some basic know-how. And this means that beloved cultural dishes can be disseminated and shared and elevated with a little bit of cannabis. And I probably remiss to mention that this is also done at a pretty vastly reduced costs than what you would spend going to a dispensary. I know for myself where my potency is, I can't just go in and buy one package of edibles and have that suit me. I'm going to need probably a couple of packages. And at that point, it starts to get really expensive when I can make an infusion and then make an entire batch of cookies that I can enjoy for, well, it depends on how many I give away, but you get the idea. Now we have post-legalization, and that's created a for-profit market for infused consumer packaged goods, which increases the cost of the edibles, as I just mentioned. It also requires a lot of packaging, which often just creates a lot of waste that goes into the landfill. And of course, there are brands out there that are being really conscious around that to reduce the waste that goes along with their edibles or other cannabis products. But the reality is there's a lot of waste in the cannabis space, in the legal cannabis market. And then there's the marketing and branding, and where it's allowed, because it is restricted in a lot of places. It's definitely restricted here in Canada, but it's essentially designed to sell you something that you don't necessarily need. And consumers don't often have a lot of input. And one space I see this in is, of course, I worked in a dispensary for a few years myself, and those high THC products were just pushed quite a bit. And there's still this notion that high THC means it's a better product, where I think most of us would probably agree that high THC doesn't necessarily give you the effects that you're actually after. But what you do get with some of those legal market options is you get precision dosing. You get nano emulsion and nanotechnology for faster onset, shelf stability, consistency, and standardization. But sometimes it's at the cost of variety and a little soul. So we end up with this tension between corporate consistency versus homemade creativity, but homemade traditions hold irreplaceable cultural value. So as a social equalizer, edibles are so wonderful because not everybody smokes, but everyone eats and drinks. And people are also these days looking for alternatives to alcohol consumption, as we hear. It seems like every time we open the news, another article about how drinking is really bad for us. And edibles can really fit that bill for people who are seeking healthier alternatives to alcohol or who are just not interested in smoking, but do still want to consume. I've also found that members of the Bite Me Cannabis Club have really bonded over their experiences of growing cannabis and making edibles, and they want to share that with others and others in the group, and people will ask questions, share their recipes and pictures and their knowledge, and there's no gatekeeping. And this has created a real sharing mindset in the community. And of course, I know there's other communities out there as well where you will find this. I just have personal experience with the Bite Me Cannabis Club. And edibles can also be as communal or as socially oriented as you want them to be. You can make them for yourself, which I do often. You can make them for others, which I love to share the edibles that I'm making. Maybe you're making edibles for those in need, gifting them to someone you care about, or trading them via edible swaps. Edibles made in your own home kitchen are a powerful tool of sharing and fostering relationships. And I'd also should mention here, because it often gets left out of the conversation, but topicals are another really beautiful way to share a homemade product with somebody, even though they may not consume cannabis. And they can find a lot of benefit from a topical. I know I personally use topicals almost every single day, and they are one of my favorite things to gift because you don't have to be a regular cannabis consumer to reap the benefits of cannabis in your life. Edibles are also a cultural glue because they're food-based, and it's a great way, a food-based way to get elevated. And rituals around food, sharing meals, bonding, or getting to know someone often happens around the table. Even something as simple as enjoying a coffee or a tea together can be included in the edibles experience, and the cannabis kitchen becomes a safe space. So DIY edibles preserve what corporate products can't replicate, which is accessibility, heritage, and the human touch. So homemade edibles still matter. They're affordable, they allow for cultural preservation, creative freedom, personalization, and medical access. So what I'm hoping to see, and I am actually seeing this more and more out there, are more workshops, classes, hands-on learning. I've been hearing about more food kits, people exploring food kits with infusions, infused foods, infused baking mixes. There's also a growing interest in microdosing and low dose options. And then, of course, you have new and interesting functional blends like CBD, CBG, CBN, THCV, and even non-decarboxylated cannabinoids like your THCA and CBDA. And these are great conversation or combinations for people who are looking to achieve certain wellness goals. And then, of course, we have plant pairings. We have adaptogens, herbs, and terpene-rich ingredients for enhancing the benefits as well. And I think those are pretty interesting places to explore, even as a home edibles maker. You're starting to see some of those out on the market, but there's no reason as a home edible maker you couldn't include some of those things in your own edible making. So the call to action, there's a couple of things here. One is robust education platforms, including workshops, recipe sharing sites like Bite Me, and community learning spaces that demystify edible making and empower home cooks with knowledge and confidence. And then, of course, there's also the laws that will safeguard home infusion rights, but probably more importantly, because I don't hear home infusion rights being talked about too much when it comes to legislation, but home grow. And I obviously think home grow must be protected. And that helps to keep DIY cannabis accessible to everyone, because it also allows someone who's growing their own cannabis to make their own edibles. Because what else are you going to do with all that weed? So the vision is to preserve what made cannabis culture meaningful while expanding access for everyone. And the future of cannabis culture depends on balancing industry innovation with grassroots creativity. Innovation should expand access and not replace tradition. So I really do believe your garden and your kitchen are one of the best dispensaries that you'll ever have. Cannabis belongs in every kitchen. Edibles don't need to be exclusive or expensive. Every kitchen can be a cannabis kitchen with the right knowledge. Now, notice I said not the right products or the right tools. And the future of cannabis is homemade. So in closing, my invitation to you is to share recipes if you're already making edibles, your stories and your knowledge through community platforms that you may be involved in, your local community, friends and family. And if you haven't made edibles before, maybe reach out to someone who can show you how to do it and try it out and see how it works out. I didn't actually do a whole lot of baking before I started making edibles, though I have done a lot of baking in my life because I did grow up with a grandmother who baked with my sister and I quite a bit when we were younger, because I think she didn't know what else to do with us when we were in elementary and high school. So what we would go over and visit my grandmother and we would do a lot of baking. But now that I've gotten back into baking through edibles and cooking as well, but it's encouraged me to cook and bake non-infused items too, because anything that I talk about, for instance, on my podcast, as far as infusing, you don't have to infuse anything. You can just enjoy the process. So it's really encouraged me to bake and cook a lot of non-infused items as well. So lastly, I wouldn't be here, shameless plug a little bit, but you can find my show, Bite Me, the show about edibles, on all your podcast platforms and on YouTube. And at Bite Me Podcast is kind of the handle that you'll find me pretty much everywhere, as you can see here. And thank you. I just want to say thank you for spending your time and energy with me today. I know we're all very busy, and I appreciate the time and energy. And if anyone has any questions or anything, I can't really see the chat because I've been too busy talking, but I'm happy to entertain questions as well.
Definitely. Feel free to unmute yourself and add some questions or type them in chat. Any good edible recipes you've got?
Oh, there's so many. I mean, if you
Is the
go to my
cookbook coming
website,
next?
well, no, I don't have a cookbook coming out yet because there's so many great like professional chefs that have
Uh,
put out a lot of great cookbooks, and I've had the privilege to interview a number of them on my show. And I should mention, I do all this stuff not being a professional chef. I love making edibles and I enjoy cooking, but I'm not personally a professional chef. So I really like to think that that encourages people because if I can do it, you can do it. So
Definitely. I still have some extract I'd like to make and put it into sugar and try to experiment with some recipes like that using infused sugar.
yeah,
As
yeah,
It's very interesting. And in being able to dose yourself too, I think at home and put your own spin on the recipe means you get to eat something else that's not a gummy
yeah.
or some rope of gummies or whatever else random they're selling today.
It
But
totally
no,
expands your horizon for what can be infused because you start to learn that like I mentioned earlier, almost anything can be infused in some way. So
yes, fire up the barbecue.
yeah, yeah.
Hey, awesome, Margaret. Well, thank you very much for presenting today and sharing some of your knowledge. We appreciate it. And we'll include all your details from the slide before on that contact email going out to everyone.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Hey, great.